Hello, welcome everyone. We are very sorry for some technical difficulties, but we are back with you. And this is a combined meeting of the McLean County, the Mental Health Advisory Board and the Board of Health kind of standing committee on behavioral health. And so we are meeting together today to make decisions about funding focuses for the coming year. And I just want to welcome all of you. I think the significance of this meeting is so great that evil powers are trying to take over. So we are not going to let them do it. We are going to prevail, and we are going to have a great meeting, and we're going to have blessings that guide us through this meeting. So first of all, we need to do a roll call. And is there someone there that can do that? Is there a administrative assistant, or do you want to do that, Amy, or there's somebody there that can do that?
Sure, I will do that. Go back to my page. Okay.
Kind of already done it.
The Mental Health Advisory Board, we have Corey Tello. Chief Bleichner isn't with us. Chief Bleichner is with us. Chief Moore is here. Dr. Wolf is not here. Dr. Strauss is not here. Dan Deneen is here. Gabby Bonte is here. Mary Campbell is not here. Lori Walrab is here. Sharon Fitzer is not. Trisha Malak. Martha Dittmer is not here. And Faye Freeman Smith is with us. And, yep, and Chief Moore just emailed me that he doesn't have any audio. Scott or Craig, I'm not sure if you guys can help him.
That wouldn't be from our end, I don't think. It might just be the speakers are turned down, or he might need to reconnect them.
Okay. And then from the Behavioral Health Standing Committee, the Behavioral Health Policy and Funding Committee, we have Hannah Eisner is here. Judy Buchanan is with us. Carla Pohl is with us. And then again, Corey Tello is also part of that board is with us. And Susan Schaefer is with us.
Thank you, Amy.
No problem.
I would just like to make a quick introduction and welcome to our two members that have not participated with us before. Although I guess Faye, did Faye do it? I think she might have been with us before. Faye Freeman Smith is Heartland College Administrator. She's the Director of Student Counseling Services. So very glad to have you here, Faye, and a member of this committee. And Martha Dittmer is the newest member. She's with a corrections and parole background, and obviously she's not able to be here. I just wanted to also give a shout out to Amy Hancock, who is the Behavioral Health Program Manager and who helped kind of get some of our Mental Health Advisory Board new members and did a fabulous job with that. And just for those who might be listening in, I'll just mention that the Mental Health Advisory Board advises the Board of Health in its 553 role as we allocate tax dollars levied for behavioral health service. And we've already seen who's on that board. And then the Behavioral Health Standing Committee of the Board of Health is a small group of behavioral Board of Health members who examine policy and funding issues to bring those forward in a more studied way to the full Board of Health. And you've seen who those are. So again, if you will bear with me, I'm going to make just a few statements that kind of are going to give context to what we're going to be doing today. And so I promise that after I'm done with my little intro, it's really going to be a meeting of, I'm hoping, very rich, robust dialogue. But I want to just do a little stage setting first, if you will. And let me just also start with just a little bit of housekeeping, which is, remember, as we've talked about, mute your microphones when you're not speaking, and remember to unmute them when you want to speak. And raise your hand for those that are not on the phone. Raise your hand when you have something to say so you can be acknowledged and so we're not talking over each other. So thank you for that. Okay, I think I'm quite sure that you join me in feeling that never has the area of behavioral health been more critical or the needs more urgent. That's why I'm so grateful that you're here in the midst of your other responsibilities and calls to duty. Some of you are truly right on those front lines of dealing with so many things. And so we really appreciate that you've done that. I'm also sure you all are feeling stretched by the steep learning curves that you've all had in new ways of working, new ways of communicating and relating, and new technologies. So again, we thank you for hanging in there and bearing with those frustrations sometimes. I believe truly that this is the right group at just the right time. And your voice and input are very much needed, they're very much respected, and they're very much appreciated. I'm always concerned about the amount of time we have, and that's why I'm going to try to stay as organized and focused as possible in offering this context and then getting to the work of the day. So the goals for today are really fourfold, and it's one, to make sure that particularly the Mental Health Advisory Board members have all the information you need or want, and that's why you got documents that kind of laid out the context of kind of the rationale and then initiatives that give direction to our work. So in the packet that you received, I'm hoping you had a chance to review all that, because it kind of shows you what services we have been funding, what ones we've currently been funding, what we funded in the past. And then we're hoping, obviously, today to talk about if there are any new directions and also emerging directions coming out of what is happening. The second goal, first, to make sure you have what you need to make sense of everything. Secondly, that you give us input on what you're currently observing from your vantage point in your field area of work. The third is to have a targeted brainstorming session regarding focus areas that you recommend to us based on your knowledge, your experience, and your expertise. And finally, we want to determine the focus areas that we're going to bring forward to the full Board of Health. So that's kind of the overall things we need to accomplish today. So the needs are so great that it would be easy to run in a million different directions. And believe me, over the past few days, I have been on fire and I have been running in a million directions because you're just overwhelmed by what could and should be happening. Oh, Rick, I'm glad you joined us. Hi. And so, but I'm hoping we can focus on those things that are in our lane, the behavioral health lane, that will be outcome and evidence-based and that will make a real impact. And our work is about meeting needs, ongoing and emerging in the arena of behavioral health. So much of what is happening is trauma. We've got trauma of discrimination and inequality. We've got trauma of dealing with a pandemic, which has led to a lost sense of normalcy, grieving for things that did not happen, could not happen. In some cases, loss of jobs and income. In some cases, tragically, loss of life. That has been the convergence of those traumas, the economic trauma, the trauma of discrimination and inequality, the trauma of the pandemic and all it's done to the normalcy of our lives. That is something that this group can be very, very helpful in helping us bring reconciliation and support to the community, and particularly those most impacted. Trauma has been an initiative of the county and of the health department. Amy's done a lot to bring that forward. So has Tricia Malott and others. Certainly Susan has been a big part of that in the county board. So we just want to remember that as one of our pillars, I think, that we want to focus on. So again, as I talked about, and again, I don't have too much more to say, so bear with me. But the packet was designed to give you that framework of making sense of things. So it kind of talks about what studies and initiatives are guiding our work, And that is to make sure that our efforts across the whole county and all the social service sector and medical sector and first responder sector, that we're all moving in the same direction, that our efforts are coordinated, collaborative. And we're very proud of that. I think, we've done an amazing job the last 3, 4, some or more years to really be holding hands, working together, walking together, supporting each other, growing together, learning together, picking each other up, having hard conversations when we needed to have hard conversations. So I'm very proud of us, but that's something we really need to continue to work hard, because as the economy is decimating some of our budgets, it's easy to get back into that mindset of, oh my gosh, I've just got to scramble for my piece of whatever's left. And we have to really work diligently to stay in that collaborative partner mindset that we've come to really, that's come to symbolize McLean County and its behavioral health efforts. So on page 8, you have a summary of the community efforts funded by the major funders. And then before I ask you if you have any questions, and before I turn it over to you, I'm just going to briefly share some information that I gathered yesterday, because I felt, knowing what has been happening day by day, and the urgency and the changing intensity, I wanted to reach out to some first responders, and I'm very glad that Rick and Brian are here, because I'm hoping they're going to give us their firsthand visions and sense of need as well. But I'm just going to talk about just some conversations I had and information I gathered, and then we'll go from there. So I spoke with Path, and I did learn yesterday that the crisis intervention calls increased 75% from April to May, after they dropped off 50% from March to April, because as you will remember, those first few weeks of the pandemic, everybody kind of just was hunkered down and almost afraid to move or reach out at all. And so there was first a drop, and then again from April to May, a 75% increase in crisis intervention calls. And that means, when I say that, that means the calls resulted in a call to the crisis team. And they also at PATH, they told me that about 42% of the calls, the total volume calls, have been about suicide, counseling, crisis intervention, mental illness, and need for just talking support. The suicide-related calls were 40 in March, 47 in April, and 50 in May. So following that call, I'll let you absorb that just for a minute. Following that call, I spoke with 2 people that are affiliated with the McLean County Center for Human Services crisis team, both the crisis worker and the crisis team supervisor, Megan Mosier, who we all love and respect. And what I learned there is they definitely are seeing effects of isolation and lack of support, lots and lots of stress and anxiety, fearfulness about leaving, going out of homes, concerns about lost jobs, financial concerns, particularly sometimes for older people who have lost what money they were counting on in the stock market or in other ways. Trust issues are a factor that they're seeing. They also felt that calls were down initially at the start of the pandemic because people were fearful about contact, or especially like going to the ER, but that's certainly turned around now. And again, if you will bear with me, and for clarity, the 3 trends that the crisis team is seeing are more suicide attempts, tragically, more psychosis, which they feel relates to the tremendous stress people have been under for many factors coming at them. Plus, sometimes it's related to the use of substances that they've used to kind of self-medicate, and that, of course, can exacerbate delusions and paranoia. And the 3rd trend they've seen is that those that they're being called out to deal with crisis, those people are having issues of much greater acuity. About 30% have required hospitalization. That is very rare. They have prided themselves on, trying to be able to deflect people from hospitalizations, and they've been like 20% or under for a long time, and they're now spiked to 30% of people requiring hospitalizations, which in itself has been a nightmare because many of the places they would typically put people have been closed because of worries about virus spreading. So they've had quite a challenge. They also feel like that greater acuity of people that they're working with has to do with the fact that support systems have kind of broken down because people are not able to check on each other as much, at least not face-to-face contact, and that has definitely had a bearing on some of this. And finally, they're also seeing people dealing with grief and loss. And as I mentioned, loss of job, loss of a family member, loss of a significant life event that was not able to go forward. So one of the things that the Megan Mosier wanted to leave with us to think about is it's really, really important that we as a county figure out how to get the message out that we need to get people to use services early on, to not wait until things are so serious. And we've got to get resources in people's hands because there's so many good strategies and tools, and the crisis team has put together packets of fabulous materials that would be good resources for people, but just figuring out how to get all of those resources in people's hands, plus being able to use, know about apps like Calm and some of the other wonderful apps that are out there that would help people deal with stress and anxiety. So Headspace is another one. So anyway, we just need to help make linkages and provide support. Okay, and then two more and then I'm done. Okay, I also reached out to Project Oz to find out what's happening with adolescents and some of their little bit older clients. And what they're seeing is the events surrounding Mr. Floyd's horrendous murder, that they're feeling good that many of the youth they work with are seeing it as a call to positive action. But those youth are also concerned because they may have a friend or friends that are going in a different direction. And so they're pulled with how to figure out how to balance that space between them wanting to do it right and knowing that they've got others that are taking a different direction on it. And finally, I spoke to people in charge of community schools, which of course right now is just at Fairview Elementary, Sheridan Elementary, and Cedar Ridge Elementary. They have grave concerns that there have not been outside adult eyes on kids for several months now. And some of those families are the ones that are not able to address the needs and vulnerabilities of these children or their own needs and vulnerabilities. And they also may be in homes with adults that are using substances where the economic issues have been exacerbated by job loss, layoffs, or shortened hours. So they also, because they offer summer learning for those, for students that are identified in those buildings as needing extra learning support, they're finding that families are not always taking advantage of that this summer because they're just kind of exhausted from all the chaos, and plus they're kind of exhausted from doing online learning the last couple of months of the school year. So the gap between the advantaged and disadvantaged students, both in terms of economics and in terms of education, is going to be widening. And that is a huge concern, has been for a long time. Okay, so I am done with my long-winded intro. And again, I thought what would make sense is maybe we'll just go around and have everybody introduce yourself briefly. And in this first round of going around, if you would just give us a snapshot of what you are currently seeing related to all of those convergence of crises that are coming at us at one time. And so shall we start with Carla? Do you want to talk a little bit about it from an ISU professor lens?
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Carla Pohl. I teach public health and pediatrics at ISU. I think what I'm seeing is a lot of concern because we have seniors, And so most of their concerns are related to how they're going to get a job and how they're going to function in the workforce. And so there's a lot of anxiety and around that because things are pretty uncertain. They have to become certified through a state board exam. And as you may or may not know, the testing sites, even for teachers, have been shut down. So there's just a lot of anxiety and concern over how they're going to manage after they graduate.
I just real quickly wanted to let you guys know that Chief Moore is still with us. He ended up having to call in. I'm not sure if he's caller 8 or 9. Chief Moore, can you say something so we know which caller you are?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes,
We can hear.
yes, we're very glad. And you know what? Were you able to hear me during this whole time?
I was, yes. Yep.
Okay, are you able to, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing? And thank you for all that you're doing, by the way.
And sorry,
Thank
just
you.
real
No.
quick. I'm sorry, just real quick. Caller number 9 is Martha Dittmer. She's one of our new members. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Moore.
No, thank you. Welcome, Martha.
Okay, I'll go ahead.
Hello, thank you.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Corey, do you want me to go ahead and proceed?
Yes, please.
Okay, so yeah, we've seen quite a gamut of things since the onset of COVID, and of course we were watching it early on as it hit the West Coast and how it impacted departments out there, and we've seen everything from how it impacted our employees, just initially as some concerns of the transports of COVID patients to quarantining and how it impacted families and concern for people to come to work and potentially take something home to their family. A lot of individuals have family members that have complicated medical history and worried of the impact of potentially taking that home. And then seeing the impact in the nursing home when family couldn't even see, their family member that was experiencing illness. And then our individuals being like that conduit and talking to the family member for the individual. So a lot of stress from that standpoint, and then seeing that, in the community as well. So yeah, there's obviously a lot of frustration that was ramping up due to the long extent of the stay at home. And then seeing that frustration from first responders in healthcare, as there were members of the public that didn't seem to take, CDC recommendations and guidelines seriously and still be out and moving in the community or not wearing, masks like being, guided to. And even then to areas that had opened up, and then coworkers that would maybe go to an area that had been opened to seek dining or recreation, and then how that impacts coworkers and that. So all those things added together, I think, have added to a lot of frustration. And then obviously the unrest that has been experienced the last week or more, and the horrific events that happened in Minneapolis. So yeah, I can see, and I appreciate some of the comments that Corey was speaking about. But even, as you see it in your own family members, and, I've got a high schooler that's been home since this period of time, and just hearing the interaction with a lot of her friends and the challenges of kids that didn't get to experience their graduations and some of those things associated with prom and the year end. Of course, I think my daughter goes in today to get her stuff from the school. So I don't know if I've hit everything, but definitely there are a lot of people that are very frustrated and feeling anxiety based on the events of the last 3 months, and we're seeing it. I haven't necessarily seen. I didn't pull the actual data for our responses on psychologicals for the last 3 months, but I just perused through my daily reports for the last few weeks, and it seems like those numbers are pretty much average. Of course, we've been watching the COVID transports since early in mid-March, watching those to see the impact on the community, and of course now the last few weeks we've seen a decline in those after the nursing home kind of stabilized here in town. So I know I rambled quite a bit there, so I apologize, but I didn't introduce myself. Brian Moore, I am Fire Chief of the City of Bloomington. So
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for all you're doing. I'm sure it's been quite challenging. Shall we have, how about Tricia Malott? Do you want to kind of tell us what's going on from your perspective, since you run some of the programs that are very directly impacted?
Sure. So, I mean, early on with triage, triage opened in the midst of COVID. So right as a state, we were transitioning to shelter in places when triage opened. So we were certainly slow in the beginning, which makes sense because people were staying home. We have seen some more people this week in particular. And which was also part of what I expected, was that as the shelter in place lifted and more things opened back up, we'd be more likely to see some folks. And that seems to be true so far. We continue to look at how we can expand our hours and get closer to the 24/7 that is intended, and have been working with Chestnut as our partner for the peer staffing to try to get to that point and to figure out how we can possibly even accommodate that, even with just our own staff, to possibly offer more alternatives. And then Fuse, we've continued to have daily contact with all the participants. And a lot of it has been by phone, but we've probably maintained at least once a week, eyes on, in-person contact to some extent throughout all of this for most of them. As expected, some of them have really struggled with the isolation and not being able to either do things that they used to do or even be able to walk into the office like they could before. And because our Fuse team is staffed essentially by 3 different agencies, we have county employees, we have Chestnut employees, and then we have a employment specialist through Bridgeway. And so it also means that we're evaluating 3 different personnel policies in relation to COVID in terms of how the team operates and whether they can or cannot be on site based on their technical employer. And so we've made it work. And it has worked. Clients have felt supported. They have been able to maintain their appointments with the prescriber. We've continued to work with them on their medications. We're actually transitioning the clinic back into the office today and have put precautions in place so there's no overlap between participants. And so there's a set amount of time scheduled in between them for disinfecting the office before the next person comes in, to be able to give some continuity sort of back to them as we move forward. And part of my focus has also been trying to help make sure that my staff are good and they're coping well so that they can continue to help clients, because what everybody else is seeing is also what we see. So
Self-care right now for all of you first responders is huge. Talk about, stress and anxiety. Wow. Thank you. Anything you're seeing, we'll do a second round where we kind of talk about what are you seeing that would give direction to what we should be looking for as we decide on focus areas. Rick, do you want to go next? And thank you for what you've been doing. Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, no, you're welcome. I'm glad I was able to make it today. I shared with Amy, I didn't know, one of those things day to day, what my activity would be. I'd had a little trouble with my audio. Are you able to hear me okay? Okay, good. Yeah, I'll just try and cover some things quickly in the interest of everybody's time. I mean, as Chief Moore had said, I kind of, now looking back on it, longing a little bit for the days when COVID was all we had to worry about. But we thought things were frustrating and stressful then, and they were. But we will get through this. Yeah, with the COVID, I mean, we saw some things, and we've shared that with the media. I mean, there were increased trends in domestic violence, which you would expect. People at home, all the stressors given that everybody else has talked about, whether it's loss of jobs or inability to see other family members, it certainly contributed to a lot of that. We also saw an increase in what we call well-being checks. Individuals that were concerned because a family member had said, or they'd received a text from somebody, and so or they'd lost their job and they hadn't heard from them in a day, and there was just a lot of those types of calls. We saw a big increase in those, as you can imagine. Some of you know, and it's not as easy to track the mental health calls given the Aegis system that we have, but so we can't go in and do a quantitative analysis on all of the mental health calls because, as you all know, some of those spill over into domestic, some of them spill over into suspicious persons. I mean, they cross over a lot of different boundaries there. But from talking with my supervisory staff, they've certainly seen an increase in calls where there's mental health issues or behavioral health cause. That's a component of that. So the other part was our staff. I mean, the community had a lot of stress, but our staff had a lot of stress too. I mean, there were a lot of things going through that some folks kind of forget about, but they're human. We experienced all the same things everybody else experienced: separations from family, friends. I personally, I have a mother who's living in a retirement center here locally, and it was difficult for me. I'm a caregiver. I was certainly able to go see her, but she hasn't been able to have regular contact with her grandkids and daughter-in-law and things like that. And I see the strain that kind of plays on her, and that's played out 100 times throughout our organization with our employees. And so that's something that I wanted to at least mention too. That we also had a little shift in some stress that created from adjusting to things just from the unknown, but also from some of the tasks that we were doing and things we were operating under was stuff that's traditionally not police related. I mean, we had, we were dabbling pretty heavily several times into that behavioral or mental health or public health side, if you will, when we've got, we're having to make determinations on non-essential businesses, and if they don't fit, and then having to meet with them and talk to them about that they can't be open, and certainly hearing their strain and stress, but that and whether folks are wearing masks and how many people are out gathering and doing things like that. That was stressful because it was a change. And so we tried to get together, get on the same page, reduce what change we could by sharing clear direction with our staff early on. And then we tried to do what we could in putting out special orders to deal with those things because we knew we wanted them to be aware of what our plan was and that we had a plan and to ease it as much as we could. So, with that, I mean, I think we have seen some of those types of calls that definitely have declined. They haven't disappeared. There's a lot of talk out there, given all the protests that are going on. If that will now see a spike, I don't know. Time will tell. We'll see. But I'm thankful that seems to be trending, in a very positive direction. So, yeah, and in reference to George Floyd's death, I mean, I came out as well as Sheriff Sandage and Chief Donath and others, the state's attorney, when asked about the media about that, and certainly our comments were that no, it's, I can't explain that. When I look at that, clearly to me, that's not anything that a police officer should do in that particular situation. And I know sometimes we get questions or there's things that come up and we say, well, maybe we need more information. Maybe we need to get the full story. It was pretty clear when looking at that. I don't know what other video would come in. I didn't see any lawful justification for why that officer did what he did. And so in that case, to me, it was tragic, but it was so preventable that it sickened me, really. And then it made me question the culture of that organization. We're not perfect. I mean, I'm the first one. I'm very proud of my organization, but I've learned in 29 years, you can't get on your high horse, because as much as I preach about, the quality of officers we have. It wasn't that long ago I had an officer that committed a serious felony in a breach of the public's confidence in mine that I would not have ever expected. But when that happened, we took quick and immediate action. And because that's my standard, but it's also what I expect of every other officer on our department. And there was no officer on our department that defended his actions, felt that that was okay. And that's our culture. That's the normal police department's culture. And so when we looked at that video, that is not normal's culture to have someone doing those kind of actions. And so, you know, it made me question the culture of Minneapolis, only because if, you know, you could have one officer, like I said, back to that situation where we had the officer we had to terminate. You could have one bad apple, but to see that and to see 3 other officers standing around and doing nothing while that man died is inexcusable. And you know, again, I could never imagine that happening here, because part of, you know, second to care of the public is buddy care, and part of that is watching out for your fellow officers. And that doesn't mean covering things up. That just means when you see an officer that's doing something, whether they get emotionally involved in something, because sometimes situations push your buttons, we're human. That's where we rely on our fellow officers to step up and tell us and grab us and say no. And in that situation, those officers absolutely should have stepped in and prevented that from continuing. So I won't harp on that anymore. The one thing I will say is immediately after that, we had conversations with our staff. I pushed out information to all my supervisors after talking with them to share and have them have that discussion face to face with their officers working for them at the shift level, that is not acceptable. And also reinforce and go over them with our policy, what our policy is on use of force, and the fact that our policy on force values life and only using force when necessary. And even when we have to use force, we balance that with the preservation of life. And also in that, we have de-escalation built into it. So our hope is we try and de-escalate situations through all of our training. People ask me, well, what's your policy? It's not one policy. It's woven through the organization's expectations and a lot of policies, mental health policies and training, cultural diversity and training. All of those come together to help us get tools to the officers to de-escalate those situations before we even have to use force. But also, once we do use force, we then, once the resistance is stopped, the force then stops that we had to use appropriately. And we also, as part of it that I would share, and just for this, I mean, it's not a secret, but also I pushed out to them that talk about it's no secret in law enforcement. We have it in a part of our mental health, one of our mental health directives, but it talks about positional asphyxia. There's been several cases out there where individuals who are proned out on their stomach with weight on them have had in-custody deaths. And for that reason, in our policy that deals with excited delirium, deal with individuals that have behavioral health issues, that once we take them into custody, if we have to do that, that you should avoid keeping them in that position any longer than have to. The sooner you can get them up and get them secured, the better. If for some reason things are so out of control, you can't get them off the ground, then the policy states that you'll roll them over to their side so that you're not having that weight pressed on them and restricted their breathing. And so I felt that was important to share with staff. And so we did that immediately following this. So that's just a little insight, and I've talked for too long, but I'm going on a few hours of sleep the last couple.
That's okay. I'm sure those are points you need and want to make, and we appreciate that. Have you seen any increase in people feeling like they need to bring guns out at this point with the tensions that are around town? Have you seen any? Do you have any concerns about that?
We have not seen it, but I've received a lot of questions since Sunday evenings. Business owners, homeowners, and they're asking about that. And what I've told them is, look, I'm not going to give you the advice on that. If it is your lawful right to do that, it is your constitutional right. But I would ask them, and I tell them, I said same thing that I asked my officers. Just because you can do something, you need to look at the risk and decide, should I do this? And I said, and several business owners, I provided the information that if something happens at your business and we are responding there, and we see a person inside with a gun, what mind frame is that officer in? I said, it's a recipe, even though it certainly is their right to do that as a business and a property owner, it is a recipe to escalate the situation, not de-escalate it, and there's a potential there for things to go bad. So, but yeah, we have not actually seen that, but I've had a lot of questions from the public about it, understandably so.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Julie Sullivan, you want to go next?
Julie is my minute taker.
Okay, sorry, forgive
She
me.
doesn't want to go.
Gabby, would you like to go next?
Yes. So let me make sure I'm unmuted. So as far as changes that we've seen,
And Gabby, would you introduce yourself and say where you're from, please? Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm Gabby Bontia, and I'm a case manager at the Salvation Army Safe Harbor Shelter. As far as changes, I mean, the first response was the COVID-19 response. And with that, you know, we did have to make adjustments to how we served. Oftentimes we changed our case management where we were no longer doing service plans, extensive service plans with clients. It was more of a, whatever you need, you let us know and we will do it together, but separately. So as far as seeing what was going on as far as COVID-19, we're seeing the first wave right now are people that have been homeless, that are already homeless, that may have already been unemployed. We did have some people lose their jobs, but we're working with our employment specialists to continue with that program. Some of my thoughts and concerns is, what is it going to look like when we see the next wave of people that may have never been homeless coming to our shelter? So that would be something new and a new adjustment. Luckily, we haven't had any situation with anyone being positive for COVID-19, but we've changed our policies to only accept people in our shelter that are from McLean County. And with the shelter in place being lifted, we've expanded our service areas, but we're still not accepting people from major metropolitan areas. And making sure that people do get tested when they can. As far as what happened recently with George Floyd, it was actually a situation that really could have gotten bad that happened on Tuesday, so a couple days after, or the days that we were seeing, I guess, the violence in our community with the looting. We had someone that used to stay at our shelter walk by, and someone had called him the N-word. So that quickly escalated. We we attempted to get him off of property and asked him to leave the property, and he left, came back, still very, very upset. But once it got to the point where we didn't feel that anybody would be in physical danger, we let him say what he needed to say and vent. It was quite a raw experience for him to tell me what it's like to be an African American, and just pour out the traumas that he's experienced in his life. And he felt really upset that I had asked him to get off the property, when what we wanted to do was make sure that we de-escalated and made sure that it was safe for everybody there. So I explained to him that what he had to say was important and that we were listening. And I explained to him that we want our shelter and all of our programs to be a safe place for people to come. And if we find that it is dangerous, we may need to call for help. We may need to call the police, but that's only because we want people to be safe. And, you know, we came to an understanding where, you know, even with social distancing, that, you know, at the end of it, we could give each other a hug. So I think it's really important for us to just stop and listen to what people say, even if at first they're screaming at you, they're screaming in your face, they're really upset to the point that they're able to share, that they're able to be heard, and that they're told that what they have to say is important.
Yeah, I think facilitated conversations is that may not be in our lane, but I think that's something the community is going to have to figure out how to do, is to facilitate conversations where people feel that their voice is going to be heard, they're being listened to, and there's some sort of a coming together of viewpoints. But that, I don't know that is behavioral health as much as it is a very broad-based community effort.
Yeah. Well,
Something
something that he said that really resonated with me. He said, hurt people hurt people. So the trauma that he has experienced and many others have an effect on behavior. And, you know, how does someone heal from being hurt? And it's to acknowledge that, and I think a person will heal when there's hope. And how do you have hope when you see something like this happen to George Floyd? I think that's the struggle.
Indeed, I know that. Yeah, lots of things about that. Thank you so much. That was very helpful. Dan, do you want to talk about what you've been seeing from your angle?
Well, I'll be very brief. Most has already been covered. You know, the main thing is public guardian I see and public.
You know what, Dan? Would you introduce yourself and who you're with? I'm sorry, I should ask everybody.
Dan Deneen, public guardian of McLean County, attorney at law. You know, the main impact I see, of course, it's depressing to be in a nursing home, and for the people who don't want to be there but have to, an assisted living facility is a lockdown where you can't see anyone, and that has led to mental health issues for a lot of different persons. And so that's pretty much it just from me.
Thank you. Martha, you ready to tell us like what kinds of things you've been seeing and what concerns they raise that we need to be thinking about in terms of behavioral health?
Hello, good afternoon.
Don't forget to introduce yourself and who you represent.
All right. So Martha Dittmer, parole. I have a caseload of sex offenders and violators of order protection. So it has been a crazy time for all of us trying to do our jobs the best we can under these circumstances with masks and movement restrictions and all of that. I think I could answer that better what I've seen in the future, because we're still kind of in the middle of it. So I transported a female back the other day, and she was very, very aggressive and fought during the transport. She has been refusing mental health treatment, and it's hard to force or highly encourage them to go during this time when a lot of things are closed. A lot of sex offenders aren't allowed internet access like needed, so they cannot do the services online. So they are still attending sex offender treatment with safety guidelines, wearing masks, and social distance, but still, it's a very hard clientele to manage with the restrictions we've had to have.
Thank you.
I don't know.
I hadn't even thought about someone that could not use those resources that we've all been living on. Oh, goodness.
Yeah, it's hard.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome.
Susan and Lori, do you want to talk about anything from the county board perspective or anything from what you're seeing? Lori, you want to go first and make sure you introduce yourself?
I'm Lori Woolrab, and I'm with the McLean County Board. One of the committees I serve on is Finance Committee, and we met yesterday. And I guess I have some concern. We don't really have good information yet at this point what our financial situation is going to look like, because the payments we receive in are lagged by a few months. So, we're just now starting to see sales tax come in. I think it was from February. So we don't really have a good handle on how good or bad anything's going to look. I did notice in there that the mental health program is sitting on what looks to be a good fund balance at this point, but I don't know what the expenses are that flow out of there on any basis. I don't get detail on that easily. And the property taxes, I understand, are just, they're coming in. Of course, they were delayed somewhat, but we couldn't get a good read on, how that was, how well we were going to do in that regard. And this is just the first installment that's due now. This one I'm guessing is going to look okay. We're going to have some concern maybe with the second installment of the year. But on that note, I did ask for an update from administration for next month so that we could get a good handle on what our revenue and expenses are, and maybe we can get some kind of projection out of that and see, because we're looking okay right now. In fact, we're slightly to the good overall this month, but you could already start to see in the little information we had and knowing what we know about our general economy at this point, that's not likely to hold for very long. And that includes our shared sales tax that we get for the mental health, which we only saw the revenue from February at this point. And, so that was looking okay still. There was, I think, some decrease in that, but I think we'll start to see the decline in that starting with next month's numbers that should show March. So I'm beginning to wonder, and something we can take up later maybe in our conversation, and we have what certainly we've just heard from everybody, and feeling myself, and what we know is that we already have an increased need for these kind of services, but we're likely to face decreased revenue sources of funding for them starting, I believe, soon. And not everybody, I think, on that committee agrees with me, perhaps, but that's my take on things. So that, I think, I heard also, as listening, echoing from what some of you said, that I've been listening in on some of the United Way calls, their community calls about what they're calling a wave and what they're seeing. They started with food banks. Now they're talking about a housing crisis sort of thing, and childcare and more. But one of the pieces of their pie graph is mental health that they're seeing, as they did a survey of organizations. They've seen an increased need, just like we just heard about, the need for mental health. So, that's not one more validation to everything we're hearing here. I guess just on a personal note, I've heard. I want to thank Chief Bleichner on this and the other people in his position that. We had a friend whose business was hit on IAA Drive the other night, and he seemed to be pretty upbeat about it. But we listened to him talk for about 20 minutes the other night about that situation and the other business owners over there and what they went through. So that that wasn't very exciting. There was a night we had those rumors about some of the residential areas possibly being hit. So that personally cause some stress. And then I have a child who participates peacefully and respectfully, I believe, in demonstrations in the town that she lives in, and then that makes me nervous. So we all have these kind of things going on. So with that, I'll just stop there.
Thank you very much. And Mary Campbell, we're so glad to see you. Are you having technology problems?
It's lucky nobody was here at my house because it would have been a bad scene. I had been trying for over an hour. I had it all set up so that I could just click on to the site, and I went off to the post office. I came back and my internet was down. I live in the country. So I have been up and down the stairs, turning the system off, turning it back on. I am so glad to see all of you. I am so embarrassed. It took me an hour and 14 minutes to actually see you, but
Well,
hi.
bless you and bless your persistence. And you are not to be stopped. You are never to be stopped. So we're very happy that you're here. We're just kind of going around and talking about from each person's vantage point, like what they're currently seeing that's, not only what they've been seeing for a long time, but also what's coming out as the basis of the convergence of, COVID, economic crises, the crises of inequality and discrimination and all of those kinds of things. So we're kind of right now doing county board response. So Susan, do you want to talk next so we kind of connect up to what Lori said as well?
Yeah, I'm Susan Schaefer. I'm chair of the health committee. And I'm also the Board of Health representative for the county board. And I wear many hats. I'm also on the Behavioral Health Coordinating Council and very active in the Mental Health Action Plan creation. So one of the things in the Mental Health Action Plan that we have is that we've been doing the last couple of years is the community forum. And that we put that on every year, and Tricia is working on it for this year. It's going to be a little bit different format because of that. But last year, our topic was trauma. And I mean, how appropriate could that have been as a being able to see into the future as to what more trauma that we are all experiencing via COVID and the unrest in the country. And so I think that to me, what I'm seeing is the trauma, the effects of trauma that are coming so that they can connect.
Just a moment. Our video guy was saying that his audio dropped for a moment, so we need to make sure that Scott has audio because it's his source that rebroadcasts it back out to the web. Scott? I can't hear you, Scott, or I can see that you're unmuted. Are you speaking? You may have to text me. Okay, just a moment, folks. We are in touch with each other by cell phone, so. Okay, he says his audio is restored, so we can continue. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Faye. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Faye Freeman Smith from Heartland Community College Counseling Services, and I was going to talk a little bit about where Heartland is in the moment for enrollment for the fall, but Mary, did you want to talk about that?
Unmute, Mary. Mary, don't forget to unmute.
Right, thank you. No, Faye, you go ahead and do that. Thank you.
Okay, so as of June the 1st, as you know, our president came out with what we're planning to do for the fall. Summer courses are all online. Currently, we still have just essential staff on campus. So in the fall, we're opening up for those courses that are must have hands-on, like welding, CNA, or radiography. And so they will try all of those classes in the fall, but we still only have those essential staff on campus that need help with those classes. Also, to direct students to help them with information about how we're going to do the fall, the records office, financial aid because of the CARE Act, first generation college students programs, disability services, athletics, testing center, all of those will be available starting June the 1st so that students can come in and get access. We have coaches who are the first line for students calling for information and how to get to the resources, and so they're directing them. For counseling services, we are totally online with maybe have some drop-in services for the fall, but we're still staying mainly online and doing the interactions there. We have seen at the same trend that you talked about, Corey, in March when we went off for COVID, off campus. Students weren't calling counseling services. We had to really contact them to check, see how they were doing. And then April it increased, and now we've seen a slow increase. I think students were thinking that Heartland had closed altogether. Even though the buildings are closed, they're now cleaning and sealing rooms and continuing to do that. But I think students interpreted that as Heartland being closed. And so they had a idea of waiting for the fall. And so we're now, summer enrollment is similar to last summer, but I think students just with the announcement last Friday know what we're doing in the fall. And I think some are enrolling and making some decisions. I know across the country, they're saying that in community college may see an uptake because students are of enrollment, because students are staying home because of COVID, if that isn't, if we're not in phase 4 during the fall. I also want to speak for private practices, and I know Christine is not here, but the need for psychiatric services is great, and I know you all know that already. What we have seen in private practice is, and I do a group of counselors, we call it Circle of Counselors who are private practice, and we have seen a very high uptake of requests for services. It's overwhelming, the insurance companies calling. We have to set schedules and decline accepting appointments until we're done with some of the clients. And the clients are, first questions is about COVID, and the anxiety is high, stress is around that. And now the questions are about the racial issues. And I agree with the statement that there seems to be more and more popping up of extra issues because inability to cope, and then the underlying mental health issues that we're doing okay with is now increasing. So you see more people worry, more psychosis because of the substance uses and how people are taking care of it, and more family and marital issues as well. So I think that's all I needed to say, but it's the same. It's people have been overwhelmed because of the circumstances, and it leads back to jobs, et cetera, what's already been said. We still need to, because of the new current racial issues, seeing some people being afraid to go out more, issues about people afraid of being shot, not here in McLean County, but in other places. I'm starting to see that occurring. I think that's all. Mary, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, Mary, don't forget to introduce yourself and also speak to what you're seeing from your other positions, because you wear a lot of hats as well.
Faye, you covered it. You covered it very well. Thank you. I hear that from friends who are in private practice as well. The one other hat that I wear is the Dreams Are Possible project of training women to go into the building trades or go to Heartland Community College to their Ready to Work programs. And we've been struggling with trying to find a way to keep that program going. It's brand new. It started in December. We've actually, we have team meetings. We only have 2 half-time staff. And then Faye Sebastian and I are the co-directors, volunteers. We decided on Friday that we're going to work very hard to open the program in a very modified way. So, for example, the women were in the advanced class when we had to shut down. They were partway in, and the advanced class is to expose them to the trades, take them to the training sites, take them to the apprenticeship program so they can see what field they might want to pursue, because of course the income for women in those fields would be dramatically improved. So what we came up with was modifying our program, and we've acquired a well, I think they call it a thermometer, and we're going to have the women sign commitments that they will follow all the rules that we set forth. We have our training sites. We're modifying our building completely, and the women will be 6 feet apart, and they will have all of the safety material at their site. And we've absolutely no children on site, so we're sort of trying to modify everything so that we don't leave these women hanging, because they are primarily single moms and at home with kids who are struggling too. So we're trying to find a way. So we're reaching out to those women at this very moment to explain the guidelines and the safety precautions and see what their perception is on coming back to the program. So that's about all I have on what I'm working on currently.
Well, we wish you well with that. That's a lot to move forward with limited resources and staff. So good for you. I'm hoping that all goes very well. Judy Buchanan, do you want to talk a little bit about things from your perspective? I know you're on a lot of boards and touch a lot of things. Get to introduce all of those. Judy, you need to unmute.
Okay, I'm Judy Buchanan on the Board of Health, and as Corey mentioned, I wear several hats and serve on other community boards. I've been struck by all the comments and some of the common threads while they're in many different platforms and forms. But what I'm struck by those comments, as well as people I talk to, is just that the response. People are disbelief, it's surreal, frustration, fear, and I'm talking about the pandemic as well as the current situation that has really exploded in our country over the last couple of weeks relative to some actions to preserve justice. I think where that really brings us is to, what is the future? And people I've spoken to, what the future is going to look like. Where do we go from here? And as Rick said, we are having to look at the cultures of those places that have done well with some of the challenges they've had and those that have not, and what are the differences in their culture. And I'm struck by the word trauma being used often, and trauma informed. And I know I'm getting into, from my perspective, some of the focus areas, but I know that we have a commitment at several levels to becoming a trauma informed community. And as I look at what we might, from the behavioral health aspect and the Board of Health, that would seem to be something that might go a long way to sensitize, to maybe provide some way. People don't know what to do or what to say. Kind of like with mental health first aid, that equipped us with what to say when you were with someone or confronted someone that was struggling. And I guess my hope is, while I don't know all the components of trauma-informed care and response, to me that may be a major umbrella for us as we look forward to try to create a culture where people have access to the services they need and they feel safe. They feel valued and they feel secure, because those are some of the, I think, the emotions that people are dealing with right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've heard from everybody, right? I'm hoping. So we have, oh, I'm sorry, Hannah. Yes, I'm so sorry, Hannah. How did I forget you? The other chair, for heaven's sakes. So yeah, please tell us what you've seen.
All right. First, I'm going to give everybody a little mental health.
Don't forget to introduce, oh.
There. A little light and brightness for the day.
She is that. Oh my gosh, what a cutie. Okay. Don't forget to introduce both of yourselves.
No, I'm Hannah Eisner, and I'm on the Board of Health. Had previously been with the County Administrator's Office and the City of Bloomington before that. So one of the things I wanted to say is, it's kind of struck by, excuse me. You take him. Everything everybody said, and certainly understand that, we're facing sort of lots of extra stressors that we've had in the past, just magnifying the issues that we have faced. And I'm kind of wanting to bring this to where we are today, kind of looking at some of the areas that the Board of Health funding has, and kind of picking up from Judy's remarks. We certainly try to organize ourselves around a trauma-informed approach, but within that, then specific program areas of providing additional funding or providing funding to make sure we have good access to psychiatric services. And I think, Faye, you were alluding to the fact that you're seeing a greater demand for that. We're in the schools now, which will be invaluable, I think, as the schools reopen with our embedded schools programs. We are doing some educational programs, both in substance abuse and suicide prevention. And of course, we're funding problem-solving courts and crisis services. So I guess as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, do we have problems that we are seeing now that fall outside of these areas that we have traditionally funded, and or are the allocations of our dollars in those areas? Do we need to look at that differently now? And
I would ask you to, now we're kind of on page 17 of your packet where you were asked to, you've got kind of a targeted discussion talking points, and we hope you all looked at that ahead of time so you've had time to think about what Hannah's putting in front of you. So again, it's crisis, youth services, mental health counseling, positive child relationships, psychiatry, problem solving, domestic abuse. So in addition to what Hannah just ticked off in those areas, and also keeping in mind the continuum from prevention all the way to, long-term, people who need long-term care. First of all, are we addressing everything along the continuum? Are we addressing everything along the age range from literally birth to senior citizen? And so thinking about all of that package, where, what would you add? What are we missing? What should we maybe put more emphasis on? Hoping that you've got that. And Hannah, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just thought I'd make sure that that page was.
Yeah, and that's quite all right, Corey. I think that's where I was headed. And I guess, we have so many problems right now. We have, as Lori indicated, some uncertainties in terms of funding, property taxes. There may be some delinquencies in that, so we may not get the full amount paid in that. And I think, the health department programming only relies on the property tax revenues, but certainly the other programs that the county has initiated are sales tax based. And are those programs able to pick up some slack? Do we need to pick up slack? There's any number of places we can land, and in the next year is what we're looking at. Are there programs that really deserve our maximum effort, and even if it's to the detriment of some of the other programs that we've traditionally funded? So those just thoughts I'm throwing out there, and I'm done. Thanks, Corey.
And again, to Hannah's last point, if knowing that anything new we add means that we subtract from something we've been funding. So that's the that's the heartbreaking point of this, because we just have finite dollars. And so just not that should stop you from helping us move in a new direction, if that's indeed where we should go, but just keeping that in the back of your mind. So how do we want to do this? I just kind of feel like this is throw this open, but because I'm not going to be able to see all of you to raise, because some of you are on the phone, so you can't raise your hand, but we'll let Judy go ahead.
Thank you, Corey. And maybe Amy, you can help me with this. The trauma-informed care, response, all of that. Is that an integral part of these listed services that are here on page 17, or is that a separate program in itself? Because it seems to me that almost all of these have been mentioned as being needed, some more than others, but is the trauma-informed piece integral to these, and is it a part of them, or does it have to be separate?
So I would say that it would be part of them. So for calendar year 20, it was part of the RFP process, and the expectation that who we're funding right now, those programs, would provide at least one training of trauma-informed care to the staff members of that program. And so we can definitely, so I think it would just be part of all those programs, and we can look at maybe having higher different expectations for calendar year 21 versus that just being something separate.
Thank you. And that's, I'm just wondering, is there some way to measure the impact, if they're doing it, who has it available, how has it impacted, or have they seen anything that would equate to, helping us to evaluate that?
So as far as evaluating it, one of the challenges, but is actually a pro, is that most of the agencies that are being funded by the Board of Health are already utilizing trauma-informed approaches. And so it's hard to have that baseline to be able to evaluate it, because they're already doing it versus it's not something that's brand new to them. And especially COVID being applied as a trauma. Sorry, go ahead, Judy.
Oh, thank you. No. And I guess we just continue to have that expectation that they are using that. If they aren't, that be initiated.
Yes.
Yeah, that's been there. And I do know at our last forum, tell me if I'm right, Tricia, at the last forum, I believe we also had a session for like employers that wanted to have trauma-informed practices, like how they could do that, how they could embed that into their cultures. Is that accurate, Tricia?
It is. That was one of the topics at the forum. And then one of the things that is related to all of this that came out of the Behavioral Health Priority Action Team, out of the CHNA, and all of the community health plans that have been done through the hospital department and Chestnut through the FQHC, is prioritizing the county as a whole, like as a geographical space, becoming more trauma informed, and creating a starting point for measurement, helping transition organizations to be trauma-informed, and helping them get established to be able to do some of that work. So that falls under BHCC. That's one of the things that we'll be working on in the next year to at least have a starting measurement point. So,
yeah, I think the framework is laid, and I love hearing that you say you're going to start really thinking about how to drive it throughout the county. That's terrific. So, okay, thank you. I think psychiatry is another one that came up through another theme. I mean, Judy, you introduced trauma as one of the themes we heard collapse around our discussions. Another is psychiatry. And I just want to add that Christine Strauss, who's one of our MHAB members, she also could not be here, but she did, you probably saw that, she had a message that basically said she's requesting consideration of opportunities for psychiatric services for outpatient treatment with special attention to deficits in the forensic population. There appears to be a gap in services for incarcerated individuals upon release from the IDOC, as well as county jail inmates. And lacking continuity of psychiatric care has demonstrated detrimental effects on functioning, which then affects recidivism rates. Also substance use relapses, and they sometimes return to high-risk behaviors. So Trish, do any of the programs you're overseeing address that?
So I don't oversee jail medical, but I did partner with jail medical to help them find their current prescriber, and their current prescriber for psychiatric within the jail is the same prescriber that we use for the FUSE program, which helps with continuity for the folks who at least qualify for FUSE and are moving back and forth. But the jail does have a psychiatric prescriber. I think, I mean, there have been systems in place for discharges from jail, I mean, at least here locally, so that they have a connection for a psychiatrist, and it's either usually been through the FQHC or through CHS if they didn't come to FUSE.
So maybe that's something that needs to be just pursued in terms of coordination a little bit. So, okay. Anyone else want to speak to themes that they noted?
Well, I have a question to Faye. Maybe I see you came on, Faye. You were talking about the increase in your psychiatric services from the people you're seeing in your counseling programs. Do you know if there's access to that or where they're receiving those services?
Well, we try with, what's available for outpatient psychiatrists, but it's all filled up. So our students don't have that care because they're waiting at the least amount of wait is 6 months. So that's past the semester time, and then our hands are off because we don't have health services on campus. So we refer in the community, but it's all filled up. And so those are the students sometimes that you're seeing that need the medication, et cetera. Sometimes we refer back in their hometown if they come from another community, but here we have been unsuccessful. So I tag on with what Christine Strauss was talking about, the need of increased outpatient psychiatric care is really, really high. Otherwise, the students are just sitting, waiting, and then we see some of the behaviors that they need medication for. I know some doctors, private physicians, has been prescribing psych meds, but it's just as an interim until they can get to see the psychiatrist. And some students do not even have the insurance for that. So I just want to make sure people understood that piece.
Thank you very much. Mary, did you want to talk?
Yes, I would concur with everything that Faye just said. About a year and a half ago, I went through probably every resource for 90 miles trying to find services, psychiatric services for a family member, and they don't exist. These are individuals who, and I know this from others as well, that they have your basic affordable health care plan, and so that gives them an edge up over having nothing, but there's nobody who will take them. That's the issue. Nobody wants it because it's very low pay. And so the only resource that I know locally is the, and it was mentioned, it's physicians, is the, I think it's called the Family Clinic at Advocate Broman. They will take individuals who have affordable care plans and will provide basic services. And then the other resource is, it's very difficult. You have to have the resources to do it, is you have to private pay through the back door at the Center for Human Services. They have a separate side of their building, and if you private pay, you can, an individual can go there. Doesn't matter if they have insurance or not, they just have to have cash to pay for that. I was going to go back to the thing about incarceration. That's the, you know, with Labyrinth, with the women coming out of jail and prison. There's, I would say, I'm just going to take a guess, but like 95% of the women who go to prison have are in need of trauma-informed care and have been traumatized through abuse and assault and rapes and family. I mean, it's there's, I call it the layers of the onion. You just peel them back and they're all there. So to let them back out without services, and they don't get a whole lot while they're in, is just asking them to return to jail or prison. And one of the things that's happened with the, we have a former foster son who's been sitting in the county jail for a really long time, and he needs substance abuse services. And what with the lockdowns, they're in their cells all the time. So what we're going to have is people who are going to be released from the jail who haven't even gotten, like, to be able to attend support group meetings, because those had to all be canceled. AA and other programs would go in, NA would go into the county jail, but they can't do that under this measure. So to me, I see an increase in issues that are going to be faced by individuals who are going to be released from jail or prison. So it raises a lot of concerns for them.
The vulnerable have become much more vulnerable. Yes.
Yeah, they have. And I was just also going to quickly add, just I think, you know, trauma-informed care is the term that's used now, and it is a wonderful form of treatment. But I think, you know, it's a term that's often thrown about. Oh yeah, we do, you know, we do this, we do that. I think it might be helpful at some point. I don't know our agenda going forward, but at some point maybe to share with this mental health board what trauma-informed care is and what it isn't. And that way, as we're reading proposals and other things that come to us, we might be able to discern a little bit better who's really doing trauma-informed care and who's just using the language. So that was just my last thought.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. Okay. Did anyone else have something that they want? Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to follow up comment about the psychiatric, the psychiatrist and lack of that. That's an issue we've had for many, many, many years. And so my question is, or my thoughts are, do we want to look at, I mean, not everybody needs to see a psychiatrist based on what has been happening and things like that. Not everybody needs medication. Sometimes they just need the counseling, or just maybe even just need to go to triage or whatever. And so do we need to start looking at, I guess the term would be beefing up, or looking at more just counseling opportunities, and then making sure, I think that, if you correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't we approve kind of holding back some funds for education purposes and things like that, so that we could then
We did.
Use
That was the
use that
recommendation
to-
from the Mental Health Advisory Board last year, that we do like a campaign of education and marketing, and we were never able to effectuate that.
Right, and then maybe utilize that to help try to reach more people, because this is all affecting everybody right now. I mean, whether it's COVID or it's the unrest, it's affecting everybody in different ways. And sometimes it just needs that counseling, just maybe 1 or 2 sessions of counseling. So I don't know if there's a way to go about doing that or what, but you know, we know that the psychiatrists are in short supply, and we're going to have that issue regardless of what we fund and whatnot. So where do we fix that gap between the psychiatrists and nothing? And so that's where I'm kind of, you know, throwing that out there as a potential idea.
And I would
So-
like to pick back on that if I could.
I'm
This is
sorry.
Gabby.
Yes, Gabby, go ahead. And then Lori.
Okay, so I have a client that I'm working with. So as far as like coordination, I think is really critical at this time, and always. I have a client that where I referred to integrity counseling, and they did a screening with him and determined that he should seek psychiatry. So he went to CHS, did a screening with them, and they said that he meets the threshold for counseling and not psychiatry. So now we're calling Chestnut to get him into primary care first and then psychiatry. So that seems a little, you know, for myself, not really complicated, but from the client's perspective, to go to different places to get bits and pieces of care can seem very frustrating. So I just wanted to share that with everyone.
Thank you. We keep talking about no wrong door and trying to make that entry into services seamless. So I appreciate hearing that, because it sounds like it's time to revisit that. So thank you very much. Lori, go ahead.
Thanks, Corey. I think we face 3 possible situations with regard to financial resources. One that will be where we're at now, about the same. One that will be better off potentially, or be able to find other funding sources because of perhaps grants like we've seen from state and federal on a variety of things, or one that will be much worse off. And I guess I would think maybe we should kind of come up with a set of priorities based on those. And in that mix, I think also the availability of resources like psychiatrists, you know, what's reasonable to expect out there, you know, the shortages we have in those areas. Try to maybe put together some kind of needs matrix and funding matrix that might help guide us. And because if we have a big decrease in our available funding next year, I don't think we want to be cut short. I know it's been very hard for us to discriminate between what we want to fund and what we can let go of, but somehow I think we really need to make some very hard decisions, and we want to put our money and our, they'll use those resources where we can get the most bang for everything. So I'm just throwing that out there to see what people might think about that.
So basically kind of a leveled system, that to kind of look at a leveled system of what would take care of, I'm kind of looking at it like what would take care of more problems that are going to emerge that are not as severe, like helping people get back to dealing with anxiety, fear. I mean, we're hearing a lot about anxiety, fear, stress, all of those kinds of things. And that could be a layer that maybe could be handled, try to find the most efficient way to handle that. And some of that could be through access to resources or online resources that they could almost do that themselves with guided support, and get people to, really use those internet services that really people have, we're getting some pretty good reviews from some of those. And I think that's what Megan Mosier was speaking to is let's look at what layer where we could just give people some tools and let them kind of do self-support with guidance. And that's a whole And then we got the psychiatric that has been huge. And certainly we've been dealing with telepsych. And, you know, I know Trisha's been right in the middle of trying to live the telepsych pathway too. So we definitely need to keep going down that road. And then obviously we got the people that have devolved, people that were already mentally had very significant issues, and now they have devolved even further, and what we're going to do about that. And that speaks to psychiatry and ongoing supports for a while. So I'll just throw that out as kind of trying to find this kind of this.
It seems like United Way they've been talking about having these various partnerships with, say, like food distribution. They seem to have been making very good use of that kind of thing, and I think they always do. But, you know, maybe we want to try to put some energy into partnering with some other organizations like United Way that can help amplify what the resources we do have. We're all not duplicating.
I agree.
Go ahead,
This
Faith.
is Faye. I agree that we need to look at the levels and the coordination of care so that we aren't repeating things. I know that we did some, the telepsychiatry was APN. I think that we're doing some of that, which is okay. I just think we need to prioritize and look at the levels of care that we can do and make sure that we're coordinating as best as we can with the funding that we have. So there's some other areas like in the trauma that you were looking at, and I agree, Mary, that we need to define that, and there may be some other areas as we look at the psych services that we need to define as well.
Go ahead, Anna.
So I think, you know, what I would kind of like with the brain power of this group is to look at, you know, the programs that we have funded thus far, and maybe each of you, and I don't know, Corey, that we're going to get to any end of this today, because it's
Right.
a lot. Yeah.
Right.
And kind of look at, is it something for the next, it sounds like what we're going to have is we have this back bottleneck of people who haven't been getting services, and people now dealing with new kinds of traumas that, you know, for the next year, we may have such an intense need that we need to look at how we're doing this differently just to make sure we're catching those people. I mean, are there non-traditional programs that we could start to look at? But I mean, we have traditionally funded psychiatric and crisis are the largest dollars that the property tax money covers. And then we have these other programs that fit in. But, you know, you see the programs. I'd like your feedback on if we had to make choices, or, you know, are there some that you see absolutely essential? Are there others that we should say, it's time for you to find other funding sources, or this year it's not going to happen because we got to put more towards something else?
And those are on page 9 in your packet. That's the quick graphic with them listed. On the far left is the organization, and right next to that is the service that we're paying for and how much. So, yeah.
For example, with psych, we considered last year making funds available to more than one agency, and it turned out that did not happen because of the lack of really readiness on the part of one. But, you know, we have counseling programs, and we have, you know, is there some way we should be using those psych dollars that ensure better linkage? I'm asking I don't have answers to any of this, you know, but I think, you know, we all know we got more things to take care of than we have dollars to cover. And we have some system-wide issues that still need to be resolved. I think we've come a long way in terms of breaking barriers and better coordination, but I think we're still struggling with too much splintering. And, you know, the Scott Commission is another organization that has certainly funded mental health services. I think Lori's suggestion about looking at those and working in tandem is a great one. But I guess for today's purposes, I think we were hoping to come to some agreement on what are these funding areas or program areas that we should be looking at for our 2021 funding from the Board of Health. And I guess from my perspective, I'd like some input in terms of how do you think we're doing it thus far? Are those programs needed? Should we be shifting money, et cetera?
So if I can just add real quick to that, Hannah, that I agree. So if we today can have like some of those high level funding focus areas that we want for calendar year 21, and then start looking more into like specifics for psychiatry or crisis, or kind of what Lori was saying too, like if next year we're not going to have as much money to allocate, then we have those funding focus areas and then we can prioritize those. But that is definitely the goal of the meeting. So then next week, the Board of Health can approve those funding focus areas. And then this group can start really pinning down some of those expectations from the different programs.
Go ahead, Judy.
Thank you. Amy, I agree, and there's a lot of good comment and good information out here. But I think if we can identify the areas, then as Lori and others have suggested, look at who else might be doing that. Can we collaborate with them? I don't think there is as much duplication as there may have been at one time in this community, but there probably are still examples of it out there. And so if we have a focus area that we conclude is really being accommodated by other people and other services, well, then obviously we can look at another priority on our list. But I think we have to know what those areas are that we have concern for, and then start teasing down who's doing it or not doing it or to what level. So I would encourage us to look at those areas.
So if you look on page 17, the worksheet, and you'll see a list again of crisis, youth, mental health counseling, promoting positive child relationships, which is kind of the prevention and helping parents learn how to be good parents so they raise healthy children and do not get into abusive, bad parenting situations. Psychiatry, problem solving, courts, and domestic abuse. Why don't we just look at those 7 areas? And if we would have the mental health advisory board members, if we would have you, and if we were in a room together, I'd have us I'd have those up on a chart, and you could come up with a sticker and put your stickers behind the ones that you felt were most important. Sadly, we can't do that. So I would just ask you if we would kind of go around to the mental health advisory board members, and if you would say maybe your top 3 that you would say are absolutely critical focus areas. And can we start with, why don't we start with?
Can I interrupt real quick? Sorry, just one second. I just noticed also on that list of the 7 that Corey's talking about on page 17, doesn't include the embedded school and community-based focus area. So if you could add that to the list, that would be great.
Thank you, Amy. Good catch. Good catch, Amy. Thank you. Okay.
I'm sorry,
and
Rick, I wasn't able to hear that. Could you ask or repeat that, what you were asking we add to the list?
Sure. I guess it could go under youth services, but the embedded school and community-based program, the embedded school program, isn't on your list. So I just want to make sure it's highlighted as a focus area if you guys want the program.
Thank you. And just just to make sure so we're adding embedded schools as one, making it a list of 8. And then youth services, remember, is really the ones that typically are being done by Project Oz, and it focuses on suicide prevention, and it focuses on teaching kids coping skills and knowing how to resist substance use. But it definitely also teaches coping and conflict resolution. And go ahead, Judy.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Corey, but in terms of clarification, perhaps the mental health counseling, should we not specify that, is it our intent that it's both child and adolescent? Did you not hear me?
Yeah, I'm going to let Amy. Amy, do you want to take that?
Okay.
Yeah, sure. So I think with the mental health counseling, and the reason why that's kind of thrown out there too is that was what Susan was talking about, that it kind of goes both ways, where there's some people that aren't able to get mental health counseling that need it, but then also that plays into the psychiatry. So I guess it would be up to you guys as far as mental health counseling. Do we look at that being for just across the age spectrum, where it is for youth and adolescents and for adults, or do we have that where that mental health counseling is just for adults and then the youth services includes something with like the embedded school? Does that answer your question? Because I think I just made it really confusing.
Susan, go ahead.
Did she answer your question, Judy? Okay. All right. My question is what the domestic abuse, because that was never been something before, and so you had added that into that list too. And so, could you explain that one, please, Amy?
So with the list with the domestic abuse, the reason why that was added was hugely because of COVID-19. And so there's been the increase in domestic violence relationships because families are not able to get out of the homes. There's more financial issues. And then with the children that would fit into the domestic violence too, like we have to learn a new way of being able to identify children that are at risk or are being abused in their home, because during this time they're not going to school for staff to be able to pick up on that. And so that was just thrown out there as like a possibility due to the circumstances and the increased frustration amongst people.
And those agencies that work with DCFS are saying that, you know, that clearly is the message, a statewide issue and a national issue, that they're seeing and anticipating more abuse cases that are going to need, you know, sadly, are going to need intervention relatively quickly when they can finally be identified. Okay.
There were some families that were managing good enough, you know, that they may have been on edge, but they hadn't crossed that line into abuse because they were getting breaks, you know, from their kids going to work, the kids were going to school. And so that increase could even be new families now going into that area of abuse.
Well, this is Dan Deneen. I need to break off at about 1 o'clock. Before
Okay.
I do, I'll just weigh in.
Go. Thank you, Dan.
Number one, I think it's a small component, but I think we can't cut off crisis services just because they're the gateway for so many people. And it ties in with our thoughts that we do need to provide immediate service, try to get somebody to handle something within 48 hours or so. Number two, psychiatry, we need to take care of psychiatry because that's the worst people, and there is that big gap. And we'll just see so much more violence and other crime if we don't contribute to that. I would probably say mental health counseling would be number three, as discussed. That should be through the triage or otherwise. We should get people to see a counselor as soon as possible to start the communication problem to talk them down. So those would be the three that I would emphasize the most.
You know what? Let's do four, Dan. Give us your fourth one.
Fourth one would probably be tied in, well, the youth services, as far as we need to do some things with schools and stuff like that. Fortunately, embedded schools has been successful and we can cut back, but those are my list. In the long run, I would like to see if the county board could do it, give us a larger allocation. You know, if they take away the $200,000 we're spending on courts, we could oversee an additional $200,000 in psychiatric services. Let the county and the justice system work on the court section with their expertise. And then this group with their greater expertise could work on making sure that for the high-risk population who have been in the jail and are out, who have been in prison, just trying to minimize the recidivism rate and put that under the control of the experts who are on these two committees rather than having a state's attorney or a person who isn't as, and I'm not criticizing Don, I'm just the people in the justice system aren't as knowledgeable as this group about trying to maximize what we can do for persons with mental illness who have caused a significant problem for the justice system.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for being at the meeting. Very much appreciate it.
Okay, sorry I can't stay later, and
no, we get it.
it's
Sorry,
just,
we always.
it's just a shame. There's so many uses. We could easily go through a doubling of this amount, and we still wouldn't handle the mental health needs in this community.
Amen, amen, amen. Thank you. Hey, Rick, let's let you go next because I'm guessing, and then Brian, we're going to go after Rick is going to be Brian.
Yeah, no, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, we all know there's not enough money to go around, right? I mean, it's you squeeze the balloon here and it bulges out somewhere else, and where we take away from one, you know, we give to the other. And just looking through these from my experience, mine vote would be crisis services, psychiatry, mental health counseling, and then definitely embedded schools or that youth program I think is beneficial. But that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much. Brian?
I had to come off mute there. Sorry about that. Yeah, and I agree too. It's so difficult to look at these and you almost feel guilty about pulling something out. But I believe we have to continue with crisis services. That, from my perspective, you know, that's something that is very high on our list as we see that in our daily response. And then the follow-up to that, I think, goes hand in hand with the psychiatry and mental health counseling. From there, the embedded school program is extremely important, and we've seen a huge benefit from that. So, and I don't know, I thought we said that was going to fall into youth services, or did I misunderstand that?
No, go ahead and cite that as you did.
Brian, I confused everybody on that. So youth services would be something separate. I think we're just going with there's embedded schools. And then youth services, example of youth services that we would be funding right now would be like the NAMI program in the substance use education in the schools.
The suicide prevention and the coping and problem solving and resisting drugs.
Yeah, so yeah, that was my fault. I confused everyone. So embedded school would be separate than the youth services. And then just real quick before, I know someone was before me, but just real quick, there was also the comment that there's just a reminder and kind of building off what Dan was saying, when people are on parole, especially right now with IDOC and the jails being kind of concerned about who they take on into that setting because of COVID. A lot of people are really needing extra mental health services. A lot of justice service people are needing extra services right now because they're not able, parole's not able to violate them to send them back to corrections. And even, you know, locally, our officers are being really concerned about who they're taking into the justice system. And so that would fit into some of that mental health counseling too. Sorry, guys, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian. Are you done? Was
But,
that?
no, I guess that the problem, I guess, I you know, not knowing for sure what the school format is going to look like and this next year. I mean, I'm assuming that we're probably going to be back in school, but not knowing for sure some of the challenges that might pop up between embedded school and youth services, I guess would be my fourth. So if I had to pick immediately right now, I'd probably go towards youth services.
Go ahead, Lori. Go ahead.
Just thinking that if we do need to get into prioritization beyond this, that maybe within each of these categories, we would ask the providers to or give them input on what's priority. You know, I'm hearing a long list of things that fall under each of these that are on the sheet, but you know, maybe within those there is something that, you know, like suicide prevention, perhaps it comes to the top of the list. I'm just drawing that out. I don't know, but I think we may have to dig deeper than just the broad categories.
I agree. Yeah. Faye, go ahead and tell us yours. And then after Faye, let's do Martha.
Okay, so for me, I agree with the crisis intervention first, psychiatric, then the mental health and youth services. And under the mental health, I don't know if this is the place to the right time to say this, but to include the private practices as a resource, not necessarily funding, but I think we've overlooked the possibility of assistance and increase the coordination of services under that. And Christine and I could help with that, but it doesn't need to be funded, but it needs to be, maybe it would help with an area that you could take money from and put in another area of on your list. But just crisis intervention, psychiatry, mental health services, including the private practices, and then youth services.
Is it my turn?
After you, Mary.
Oh, yeah, I'm done.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Go ahead, Martha.
Hi. I don't know how the funding goes or where all the funding should go. I'm just going to give the information that thousands of inmates have been released either on parole or without any services or specific medications. And we are, at this time, we are not taking them back on parole violations hardly at all. Will that change? Because do we see these things ebb and flow all the time? So in the future, it might be where, we crack down on more things and they are returned, but right now it is not. We cannot take them back for hardly anything at all. And so when they are released, there is such a lag of time before they get any services that I really feel that it can be very dangerous for citizens.
Thank you. Good feedback. Go ahead, Susan.
I guess it's more of a question or an unknown here that maybe we need to follow up on with what Martha was saying, because I'm not sure how much information we get when it comes out of IDOC. I mean, when people get released from the jail and they get referred to like CHS and things like that, or other providers for psychiatric, I'm not sure where that even connection even happens from IDOC. And I don't know how much we need to, Amy, if you need to research that some more to find out how those people are, are just thrown out on the street or whatever with nothing. And so, because I don't even know if because not everybody, when they get released, do they come maybe back to their home community? They might go somewhere else. And so that's why I'm kind of not sure. And maybe we need some more information on that on that topic.
Martha, did you want to answer that, or did you want me to answer it?
Most individuals go back to the community that they were arrested in. Most of them do. They go back to the same homes, the same area, the same yuck. Very rarely are they replaced somewhere else.
And then Susan, the other piece of that too, as far as like referral, it depends on what they're doing in the prison. So if they are in like a program, like a substance abuse program or a mental health program, then there could be a connection from that program. There could be a referral made from that program inside the prison to a program in the community that they're returning to. But from my experience from working in corrections and trying to connect offenders to those programs, programs don't want to do that. They want the person to be there before they even schedule anything. And then the problem with that is what Martha is saying is then, they finally get out, they go to said agency to set up an appointment. Well, now they have to wait another month before there's an opening versus they could have waited that month in corrections And so there's a lot of flaws in the system. They go home, they have very limited psychiatric medication. So they may give them 2 weeks supply of their psychiatric medication in a two-week prescription. And hopefully the prescription is signed by the right person so they can actually use it. And then by the time they try to get into mental health in the community, an agency may want them to see mental health counseling before they see the psychiatrist. And so then you have them without medication, or so the system is not helpful. And
Set
people
up to fail. They are set up to fail. It's very
it is
sad.
not helpful.
100%. And
It's
when
not
you get
helpful
out
for people that have mental health issues, especially those that even kind of fit in that middle where they leave corrections, they're not experiencing psychosis. But then if they don't get that help that they need, some will, their mental health symptoms are going to exacerbate because they're not on that medication. So, but a lot of
they self-medicate. They start self-medicating with the drugs that are on the street, and it's a whole, yeah.
And some of them, most of the people in corrections are not in a program. And so if they're not in a program, they're expected to, I guess, Martha, it would be whether or not it was regulations, if they needed to do something when they got out, but then they may be expected to do that themselves. But it's a trick, like what Faye was saying earlier, and Gabby, as far as it's a really tricky system to navigate. Okay, I know I need help, but where do I go? What do I do? And if you don't need help,
parole agent. Yeah, it's the same with the parole agents, because we just have a list of and this is kind of statewide, not just McLean County, so don't take any of that personal, but we just get a list of treatment providers that sometimes we get online and we just throw it at them like, okay, good luck, because we can't make the appointments for them because we don't have the signed release form, because sometimes we get into where we call, oh, we can't give you that information because of HIPAA or this or that. And we're like, oh, okay, that's great. So it is really frustrating when you're trying to help an individual that, you're right, already destined for extra stress and strain because of their mental illness and because they just got out of a facility, and then they're going to go right back to where they were causing the trouble and they were self-medicating, and then parole agents are just as confused on where to go as well.
I think this highlights that we know this whole area and this population. We know they're part of the people that have been for decades discriminated against and treated inequitably because they're not allowed the opportunity to come out. I mean, the whole mass incarceration thing and all the things that go around that. So I think it behooves us, maybe our role for this group is all about advocacy too, and maybe we really try to, as I think they're going to have to look at some prison reform, these policies and these practices that are so counterproductive, and kind of drive people right back to where they started. So I think maybe that's a thought, but thank you. Martha, did you have any other areas that you would highlight for your choices on the focus areas? Besides, obviously, you would like us to look at court-related, prison-related issues.
Yeah, because that's all I am really that knowledgeable of. I don't think I can speak on any of the others. Okay. I mean, I know it's massive family trauma issues too. Sometimes the offenders go back right into the family that they abused, right. and we don't always know that. So,
okay.
But yeah.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. That was very good information for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lori, I don't think you weighed in yet. Lori.
No, I didn't. But I think I would have to, I guess what I'm going to say is that we've got people who come at this from many different backgrounds, which is wonderful. And we're each seeing these huge ball of wax issues from our own perspective. And so I'm wondering, I'd be curious to know how things are shaping up on your tally sheet there, Corey. you know, we're each going to highlight things that we think are urgent. But, you know, so I guess I would like us to see something that's driven from a broad top-down sort of perspective, and not just from our each individual insights into this, because I think and I don't know what your sheet's showing, but are we going to end up with all of those things back on our list here?
No, I think what we're seeing is we know, which we've always known, that we've always had kind of high priority ones, which are crisis, which are psychiatry, which are mental health counseling at some form, and then certainly school services at some form. And I agree with you that we can kind of dig deep into, I mean, those are broad categories, and we can dig more deeply into what within each of those categories is what we really pull out to fund. But I mean, those are the four major themes that we're definitely hearing. So we know we need to do something with crisis. We know we need to do something with psychiatry. We know we need to do something with mental health counseling, just on a broad brush for right now way, and something to give services to kids in schools on a broad brush way. So those are themes that we will drill down into.
Are there, you know, do we have, I mean, we've known this from our experience for talking and dealing with this over the years, many, you know, and some of you for many, many years in your professions. But I just kind of go back to what I heard from, and you did some of this and mentioned it earlier on, Corey, where you contacted some agencies, but go back to that United Way where they talked to 22 different agencies, sort of get some input as to what, you know, or path, what exactly, you know, what are we facing? What is this wave that's coming? Where are the top priorities within that? Because we have years of background on our own, but this is something different that we're facing, you know, and maybe we need to reprioritize based on the, you know, what they're calling the new normal.
Yeah, I think actually, I think that's an excellent idea, Lori. I think we do want to make sure that we're dealing with emerging trends. And I almost wonder if we won't have a year or two that is almost going to be almost like an interim set of services that are so unique, because the needs are going to be so, you know, so different and rampant and urgent as everybody kind of comes out of their black holes. So we may have to do something, like you're saying, that's very radically different for a couple of years and call that almost like an interim plan. But we also have to we also can't lose, I mean, there's certain services that, like the one thing I did hear from the agencies I talked to, crisis is growing and extreme. I mean, we've got people who are in worse shape than ever before. So we're going to have somebody that can meet that high level of crisis urgent need. For sure. That's a theme that came with everybody I talked to. And then the other concern that I heard, again, was just helping people deal with trauma, which we've talked about. And I think that's going to be our overarching theme of everything we look at. And then the other thing I've heard is, you know, just this idea of the disruption of maybe people never used the system before, and now their lives have kind of fallen apart around them. And what can we build that maybe isn't a real costly set of services, because it may be that their issue may be more situational than like long-term or biological or, you know, psychophysical or whatever. And so those we might come up with a really unique and creative plan for how do we give those people tools. But that was the theme that I heard, you know, people that have never before been suffering, and they're suffering. There's a lot of them suffering. And then, you know, psychiatry, people are saying, again, because of the urgency, there's got to be who's going to medicate these people, who's going to monitor medication, who's going to, you know, all those kinds of things. And then the other theme that's kind of coming through the media and everywhere else is that whole idea of a domestic, you know, people who've been victims of domestic abuse. And then I worry about the people that are enraged because of the murder of, because of the pattern of things that have been happening in terms of, oppression and things like that. And where is that going to go? And are we going to have community conflict that we've never had to deal with before? And that may be almost a community level response that we have to build. And that's why your point, Lori, about talking to other funders. I mean, I think there's some things that are going to be mega themes that the community has to look at, like conflict resolution, like healing, like empathy, like cultural competence. I mean, those are going to be huge, broad brushes that we probably need to play a role in, but not necessarily fund. And that was what I was hearing from people too. So sorry, but yes, I think you're right. We need to have lots more conversations.
Yes, if we haven't, since I guess what you said earlier was that maybe we haven't advertised or communicated these services very well. You know, I think maybe that is an area of focus. Perhaps we should add to this.
Absolutely.
Especially for the first time users, people don't know where the services are or what they are.
And
Corey, you're muted.
sorry, just like we did 211, you know, we made this huge community thrust. I almost feel like what you just said, Lori, that whole marketing and messaging idea about if you're hurting, where do you go? What do you do? I almost feel like that's got to be, you know, all the funders together, all the players together, creating this big groundswell of how do you drive that message everywhere? But I also think we could do something very targeted on that marketing messaging piece. Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about the broad thing and then drilling down. I think that one of the things that we kind of have an advantage is because we're looking at next year's funding. We're looking at funding that doesn't start until 2021. And I think that some of the things that are happening right now that are going on with some of the collaborations and they're just starting because this is all new. COVID, you know, started basically in end of February, beginning of March. You know, so we've only got like a couple months of that, and then just all of the things that have been happening with that. They're all very new, and we're looking at something for 2021, and our timeline gives us a little bit of cushion to see where are those gaps that we can fill if we need to fill gaps, and and to stay in our lane with maybe other funders or other, you know, collaborations and stuff like that. So I think that kind of gives us an advantage on that, and it gives us time to go and dig deeper as to exactly what some of these needs are and the capacity. I mean, with all the things going on, is there even capacity to do some of these things that we want more of? You know, whether we take money away from one thing and give it to something else, is there even capacity in this community to do that? And I think that we have the time here to dig deeper to see where that is, and just by going with these broad categories, we have a little bit of time here to really research and get more information from everybody.
Go ahead, Mary.
A couple of us have been around long enough to know that the need for psychiatric care is not going to be resolved by us. It's a systemic problem. There aren't psychiatrists out there, and those who are want to go to large cities where they can bring in larger dollars. So I think it's just not. Center for Human Services did a really strong effort to bring in a psychiatric nurse, and we lost her, I think, to the Marines or something. She left and went into the service. I think that anytime I try to start something, I always look at who's done it better than I could ever imagine it being done. And then I do all the research I can on those efforts, and I bring those ideas back and try to formulate those into some sort of a programmatic way of looking at it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we need to look beyond us, beyond this community, and we need to find cities who have done this better and how they've done it. And a couple of suggestions I would just throw out there. You can use a lot of money and have one psychiatrist, or you can use a lot of money and have a lot of trained professional mentors who go out and work in the community. So in the area of the criminal justice one, I know there are programs out there where they hire individuals who've been through the system, who've gone through the training, who actually become ombudsmans, I think is the word. They actually work directly in those neighborhoods. They do the same thing, NAMI, Alliance for the Mentally Ill. They had, I don't know if it still exists, but I think it was funded maybe through PATH. They actually had individuals who themselves had a background in human services, but also experienced mental health, and they went out and worked with that population. So you're looking at like 4 or 5 different people who are working with the need for the same, and then they become the connection that Martha was mentioning. They become the connection to find the resources. They become the connection to go with the person to all those 4 or 5 places we keep sending them and they get turned away. They become the advocate for that person. And you have to, somebody has to oversee that work, of course. So it has to be housed in some community setting. And I don't know which one that would be, but I just think we need to think out of the box here a little bit, because, you know, psychiatric services are not going to get any better here in this community because we're not a large urban area and there are very few psychiatrists available. So what can we do to solve the problem that somebody else has already solved, and how can we take that and apply that to McLean County? So that was all I wanted to add.
Thank you. Excellent suggestion. Thank you. And you know, that is exactly what we did when we started the mental health action plan, when Susan and John McIntyre started the mental health action plan. That's exactly what we did. We, you know, formed two groups, and one just did nothing but that. They just sought out the best possible models all around, the close and far, and studied that, and then studied, you know, the research and the policies and the practices that were, you know, evidence-based and all of that. And then another group studied what was happening, what was available in the what was already available, and what was working, what wasn't working. So I'm almost thinking, you know, maybe that's not a bad idea to do some sort of a reboot of that, where we, you know, gather some new additional information. But the problem is this whole response to COVID and this, you know, systemic discrimination and inequality. There should be people that have tackled the latter. There's not going to be people that have tackled the former, but I still think we can figure that out with support. Go ahead, Amy.
So I have a couple quick comments. I just want to play devil's advocate a little bit, which shouldn't surprise any of you. But anyways, I don't necessarily, so when I Google psychiatry in McLean County, I have quite a few options come up for psychiatrists. So if I feel like if I had insurance, I needed to go see a psychiatrist, I'm going to be able to see a psychiatrist. So I don't think there definitely is the trend that there's a lack of psychiatrists per like need of people with mental health issues. But it's not the people that have insurance that aren't seeing a psychiatrist. It's the people that have public insurance, that have Medicaid, that have Medicare, or that don't have any insurance that are not seeing the psychiatrist. And so I just want to play devil advocate in that I don't think the problem is a shortage in psychiatrists. I think the problem is that it costs a really lot of money for individuals that do not have private insurance to see a psychiatrist, and that's where some of that challenge is. And then and sadly, a lot of times because people's mental illness, especially if they have significant mental illness, unfortunately, one of the symptoms of their mental illness may be that they cannot obtain or maintain a job, which is where most of us have our health insurance through, that have private health insurance. So I just want to remind, I don't think it's most of us that are having fun. I easily found my kids a psychiatrist, but they have private insurance. And then the other thing too, I just wanted to throw out there was my thinking too with these higher level funding focus areas is that like I was talking about earlier, like we can really just kind of get to like what would be like those high level funding focus areas and then start to drill down. But I think part of like the exciting thing about that too is like for us to listen to the professionals in the community. And so if we had, you know, a funding focus area of mental health counseling. So if we put that out there as an RFP, like I would be really excited to see like, are there new agencies that would step up to the plate and they would have suggestions for these awesome programs or that would help us in this time of trauma and crisis or so I think it's important to like to not have it too open or too of a generalized focus area, but then I also think if we pin it down too much, we could really miss out on some of the experts sharing what they could do in that area. That's all I have.
Thank you.
This is Faye. I'm gonna have to bow out at this time. Thank you.
Thank you,
I
Faye.
enjoyed
Very much appreciate your being here and your input. Thank you so much.
Everyone have a safe week.
Thank you. Lori, do you want to go ahead and kind of weigh in on what areas, if you were choosing, which of those areas you would like prioritize right now as broad?
I'm not going to weigh in because I just don't feel like I had the I had the information that we heard at the beginning of this meeting, which was great input, but I just don't feel like we have a good overview. I mean, I don't feel like I have a good overview of where to go with this. I think the things you mentioned as being the top probably are the top, but I guess I'm just asking for some more input from a broader swath of the community and trying to look forward into like 21, where that Susan mentioned is really important because Amy was talking about, you know, access to psychiatrists, people who have health insurance. Well, I think, you know, we have like a 14%. I think the information comes out today on our unemployment in the state, which I haven't seen yet. So, you know, I think we have something like a 14% unemployment rate now. All of those jobs didn't have health insurance, but a lot of people are going to lose their health insurance. So they're just things that we haven't faced, you know, and I think we better put a new thinking cap on. So I'm not really ready to weigh in, I guess, on specifics here.
Okay, that's fine. Mary, do you want to weigh in on just some broad strokes?
Yeah, I'm kind of like what I think has been said a couple of times is we know what we know, and it's what we don't know that we really need. And you know, the unemployment rate is significant. I mean, the issue is so large, it's systemic. We have people without health care, we have people without employment, we have people who are angry because of discrimination. These are huge problems. And, you know, how do we even begin to look at those? I don't know whether, you know, students are working from home. I don't know if maybe there's somebody on one of the doctoral students. I just heard one report in on the criminal justice student. He was a ISU police or a Bloomington police, and he went on and got his criminal justice degree, and he's a PhD now, and he was on the radio today. I mean, I think maybe there are some people who have specialized in one narrow area that maybe they could give us what they've learned, and maybe we could put that all together and look at things a little differently. There are students maybe who are doing their thesis or they're doing their coursework online because they're at home, and maybe they want a project. I mean, certainly we wouldn't have that overnight, but it might be something in the pipeline that we could look at down the road. Because yeah, that's kind of how you can gather all that without even having to hire somebody. You get a couple of dedicated master's level students, and they will study an issue inside and out. And the Stevenson Center, for example, does that a lot too. So there are resources that maybe we could gather as much information as we can as we move into the decisions for 2021. And though we don't have anything that's ever been like this coronavirus thing, it is still health related, it is still trauma related, and maybe there's some things that we could gather from some of the nursing fields that they've learned that are impactful when people are traumatized because of fears of health. I mean, SARS was a few years ago, but I'm sure there might be something that's there. I don't know the answers, Corey. I'm sorry, but I just think.
Oh, trust me, as I've been trying to wrap my head around this too, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
That's what we
Yeah.
try to do. It's like, that's why, you know, it just seems like we have to approach it from tiered levels, and we have to figure out what is the community going to do about some tiers, what are, you know, a whole strata of social service agencies and funders going to do about some layers, and then, you know, what can we do in our little piece, and somehow figure out where the carve outs are, because no, we can't study. Yes, we need to study, you know, the most things that are bearing the heaviest on behavioral health. But, you know, there's going to be so much to, as we've already had the learning curve. Yeah, there's still lots to learn about all this. So we have
A
to,
while ago there was
make it manageable. We have to make it manageable.
We talk about embedded schools, and I think that's actually a really important word. Embedded is the programs that I've read about and have seen that have some really good success and are not all that expensive are embedded programs. So embedded in the neighborhoods. I know we talked a while about there was a police program that was trying to embed officers in the neighborhood. We had a good program. I think it was through, I don't remember which police department, maybe both, but we had a social worker on crisis calls that went out with the police officer. It didn't cost all that much money, and it probably prevented a lot of increase in domestic violence and an increase in child abuse. It probably, I don't know if there's any data that's been done here. I don't know why those programs were stopped, probably finances, but you know, police can only do what they're trained to do, and maybe what they're trained to do can be supplemented by a person who's embedded in the neighborhood, or a person who's a trained service provider. Or so I think that embedded is a really big word for us, and how we use that may maybe change the trajectory of where the funds go. Sorry, I'm just raising questions.
No, I think those are wonderful, wonderful points. Go ahead, Susan.
I just wanted to follow up on that, on one of the comments that Mary just said, is that you're talking like a co-responder program. Yeah, because we've looked at that. We actually, that's one of the things that we've looked at as a potential for on the behavioral health side. We've talked to other counties that have implemented that kind of thing, and the impact that it does have. So yeah, that's something that maybe we need to revisit, but I'm not sure that that's the focus of this, you know, of the Mental Health Advisory Board and the Board of Health as a public health kind of thing. So I think we have to, there's a big elephant in my analogy, and many of you have heard it before. My analogy on the mental health, on the behavioral health topic, when we created the mental health action plan and everything, was, you know, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You know, not literally eating an elephant, but we have the elephant got bigger, and we have to find out what little bite the Board of Health and the funding that we have for that is going to, you know, be out of that elephant. So I think that's kind of how I kind of focus that as to how does it relate to public health and behavioral, and with the behavioral health focus.
Well, and I'm sorry, my little soapbox forever has been, if we lose complete sight of prevention and early intervention, we are right back to where we were, you know, 20 years ago, when we did not try to stop a problem before it began, which is the best form of, you know, public health intervention, like keep people healthy and raise, you know, healthy children so you don't have to repair broken men. And so, you know, and again, there simply is not going to be enough money, but yes, if some community has found a way to build a matrix of services that cuts across all the different needs, we should definitely be trying to find that.
I'm going to jump on for 2 seconds, in part because I also have to jump off.
We are just about at the close anyway. Thank you, Tricia. Go ahead.
But to comment and follow up on both what Mary and Susan have addressed, to offer just a tiny bit of, I mean, it's not a full co-responder model, and so it doesn't address it completely, but for at least maybe a little bit of peace of mind as we move forward to know what's coming. I've been having follow-up conversations with NYU on the pilot project that we did within booking for testing their tool for law enforcement to use in the field to better know what to do and where to take individuals who may be experiencing substance use, homelessness, or mental health concerns. And the data, and this will actually be going into my update to BHCC, but it hasn't made it much past me at this point because the conversation was just at the end of last week. But the initial data is really fantastic on the correlation between the tool and when they compared it to the validated diagnostic screening tool. And so they are looking at what phase 3 of testing will look like, which will be rolled out to law enforcement to use in the field. We, in addition to Marion County, which is Indianapolis, both are positioned really well to continue to be the test sites for that, because we have diversion locations for officers to take somebody. And that's the other advantage of the triage center, is that when law enforcement encounters someone, they do have somewhere to take people. And that's part of why we established the triage center. And they have the decision-making criteria, and we've kept it pretty simple for them. But this tool will be one more thing that they have kind of almost literally in their back pocket to help them make those decisions and determinations. And while I would say it's not the same as having a social worker riding in the car with them to help them make that decision on the spot, it's another really good resource. And seeing the data come back from phase 2 was really exciting. So that's also part of what's coming too. So, and I have to.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate your time and stuff. Okay, thank you. All right, so anything else we want to, any other themes or patterns or concerns or issues that you want us to, additional paths you want us to go down as we try to gather more information that we haven't talked about? Okay, then it looks like we may be, thank you so much. You're hanging in there. Everybody hanging in here till the end is great. This is, I never know how to schedule these meetings because they always go way long, but I'm so grateful that you hung in there. All right, so we will be talking and deciding next steps, and we will certainly be getting back to all of you with letting you know where that goes. And we do have a board meeting next Wednesday. Go ahead, Susan.
We have some action items too. Sorry, Susan. Corey, you're on mute.
But I don't think we can do those action items because we don't have quorums of anything now with people that have jumped off. So I don't think we can do any of those things.
Do we need 4 for you said there's 11 on Mental Health Advisory Board. And so if we need 4, we still have Chief Moore, Martha, Lori, Mary, and Corey. So we have 5 on Mental Health Advisory Board. And then we have 4 out of 5 for the behavioral health. So 5 would be enough, right, out of 11?
So go or not go?
There's 11 members.
Hannah, are you still there? Hannah's
Yes.
the attorney.
Yes.
Lori,
Hannah,
I'm trying to
are you
make
with us?
sure we get this right and open meetings and making sure we do this right.
I am here, Susan. I just had to leave and get on my phone.
Hannah, do we have a quorum for Mental Health Advisory Board? There's 5 people here. Yeah, there's 5 people here from the Mental Health Advisory Board out of 11. Is that a quorum?
Wouldn't that be 6 that we would need?
A quorum is 6. No, a quorum of 11 is 7.
Okay, so we can't do the minutes for the Mental Health Advisory Board. What about the health policy?
The health policy, we have 4 out of 5 people.
Okay, so Hannah, do you want to read that or you want me just to go ahead and do it?
Yeah, just go ahead. We'll just need a motion to approve the minutes. It's what we have, right?
Right.
Anybody, I'll move to approve the minutes from our meeting.
Second, that's
Okay.
Carla.
Then
Corey?
move to, go ahead. What's the matter, Carla?
Nothing, I just was
Oh,
telling
okay.
you.
Okay, so all those in
Yeah,
favor
we
say
were
aye.
just trying to figure
All
out
those
this.
in favor say aye. Raise your hand, I should say, signify by raising your hand. Hannah, do you
Aye.
have your hand up?
Yes.
Okay, all right, motion carries. All right, and then do we want to approve the, well, that's a discussion item. So I guess that's it then, right?
So we have an action item. So for the Board of Health for next week, I'm supposed to provide them with a list of the funding focus areas as recommended by the Behavioral Health Policy and Funding Committee. And so from you guys, I heard crisis services, mental health counseling, psychiatry, and embedded school and community-based projects.
Well, and some additional study. I mean, I think that's the other message, that there's probably some things we want to study. And also with the trauma overlay, we want to have a trauma overlay.
There needs to be other information before anything goes to the Board of Health as far as just the focus areas. Is that correct?
I'd like to make that motion that we, I don't know if we want to say table, till the next policy funding meeting to determine the final focus, areas. I think that we do have some that were pretty unanimous, but I think for to go to the Board of Health next week, I don't think that we're ready to say these are the funding focus areas. These are,
Okay. And just before, I know we're wrapping up, but just so I know from like my end. Sorry, go ahead, Hannah.
I will second Susan's motion.
As far as discussion, could I just say, I think obviously we will share with them a discussion of where we will share with them the pertinent points of this discussion and why we're tabling it, obviously, at the next meeting. Yeah, okay.
So from the Behavioral Health Policy and Funding Committee, is there anything that you're specifically looking for from me as far as what you need to study, or is it just more of a conversation at a different meeting?
Amy, I would suggest that, for our Board of Health meeting, the committee will report on this meeting, as Corey suggested, and we will then have a meeting. I'll try to get them sort of an idea when people are available for the committee meeting, and then I think that would be a time when we could discuss that with you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Hannah.
So we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor say aye. Raise your hand by signifying. Sorry. Those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Motion carries. All right. I think we are adjourned. Sorry, Lori, didn't mean to cut you off.
I don't know if you would want to maybe take suggestions from people about what community organizations or groups we might, and not that we want dozens of them, but maybe there are some key organizations if there's somebody that rises to the top of as having extremely good information, maybe we would want to bring them in briefly to talk to us, but who we would want to contact. to gather some more. Is that something, I don't know, not that.
No,
Amy-
I think that's what the the policy and funding committee will look at. But do you have any suggestions in mind as you're raising that question? Do you have anybody? that you would-
I don't know that much about it, but it seems to me like the United Way, there's one person in particular who seems pretty well grounded in a process of how to go about things, and they've apparently reached out to 22 organizations, so there's that. And I'm just wondering if we would want to consider bringing in a group maybe like, some of the minority representative group to talk to, reach out, because we haven't done that, whether that's the NAACP or somebody else. So that's what the kind of things that were going through my mind.
Thank you. Good information. Okay. Anyone else have anything that they would like to add before we close? Okay. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Lori, Susan. Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you all so much for hanging in there. Appreciate it so much. Okay, take care, everybody. Stay well.